into Electric Lawn Talk. We've got an intimate little session around the campfire tonight. We've got Steven from EcoMo down in Dallas, Jarmar from Houston with Peaceful Lawn. We've got Jake out in Denver with Green Team Denver, and Michael's calling in on the telephone out in South Carolina with Quiet Lawn. So tonight we're going to be doing a little campfire discussion about money, about finance, how we think about funding our businesses. The group we got a little Discord chat, and we were talking about this pretty extensively today. It seemed to get everybody fired up, and we had some pretty strong opinions on all different sides of this discussion. So I thought it'd be good to get everybody on the mic and talk about it and hash it all out, see what everybody thinks is the best model, why they choose to fund their business the way they do. And just share that information with all of you. So I hope you enjoy it. I know I learned a lot from our discussions today, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot more here tonight. I think it's going to be a good episode. So,
Sean, I just got to point out real quick, man, you're getting me all fired up. You got geese honking in the background. You're sitting around the campfire. I wish I was there with you, man. I'm pretty jealous right now. What are you drinking over there?
I got a little Boulevardier. So it's kind of like a Negroni, but with bourbon in there instead of gin.
I didn't understand.
Sound like some highfalutin stuff.
That's my go-to.
Nice.
Especially when I'm talking to you fellas. So, what's everybody else drinking tonight? Jake, what do you got?
I'm keeping it clean tonight. I just got a can of Sprite and a bottle of Ranch here in my office. I just finished a frozen pizza, and you can't eat a frozen pizza without a healthy dousing of Ranch.
I think that checks out. All right.
Miller Lite.
There you go.
There you go. America's beer.
It's Miller time.
Michael, what are you curled up around over there?
Water. No, I did have one earlier after dinner, but just water.
And we got John Moore bouncing around on the paddy wagon tonight. What are you sipping on?
It's high quality H2O, baby. That's it.
Good stuff, guys.
H2O.
Well, yeah. So we were talking a lot today about how we go about financing our companies, right? Whether we pay for things with cash, whether we use debt to finance it, there were some pretty strong opinions on both sides of it. Steven, why don't you kick us off? What's your general philosophy? In general, kind of a broad overview, 20,000 feet of how you think about buying equipment for your company.
Okay. Yeah. So when we kind of first got this thing rolling, we didn't have any money. So we obviously didn't have any equipment either. And we just kind of slow rolled into it. Every time we would get a few more clients and make a little bit more money, we would sock a little bit of cash away. We didn't want to borrow any money when we got started because we really didn't know where this business was headed. We were kind of just trialing this thing. We've had a couple of, financing, couple loans through Stripe Capital along the way. We kind of took out our first loan through Stripe Capital, a couple years ago, and it was a small loan. It was like $3,000, and they basically take a percentage of every transaction until you pay that thing back, and then once you get that done, then they're going to qualify you for obviously a higher amount than what you had the first time around. We
suck you in.
yeah. Well, they do, and
I want to feel you out. Make sure you're responsible. You're gonna pay it back first before they start giving you some bigger amounts.
Sure. Yeah. And, they've opened some doors for us. Stripe Capital has. I know that, we're not too particularly pleased of paying 19% per transaction. But the reality of it is, if you don't have the cash, then, you got to go find it somewhere. And they've been really good to us. We we're not dependent on anything else but that, and we kind of carry that primarily, that line through them for emergencies that might happen. We had a transmission go out on a vehicle that cost 6 grand. And, when you're a small business, sometimes you just don't have that. So, or you might have it, but that might be all you have. And, you got to be able to keep the business rolling. So, we do have, some financing through Stripe Capital, but, um, I'm heavy on, I'm a believer in paying cash for just about everything or using a debit card. That's just that's what's worked for us. I know it doesn't work for everybody. I think that's helped us to kind of scale the business appropriately and not buy a whole bunch of equipment because, we had the access to capital. So we were able to kind of grow the business gradually through accumulating cash, through doing jobs and bringing jobs in and saving up money. And when we would buy a zero turn or buy a couple more mowers or buy another van. But yeah, for the most part, like I said, and like I mentioned to you guys earlier, 90% of our business is cash and debit based.
So you think kind of keeping it cash based, it keeps you honest, right? It keeps you focused on what you can afford to spend, and it's a good kind of a tool to keep you in balance.
Yeah, I think so. It depends on the person, right? Some people are obviously more responsible with credit than others. I say I feel like I'm a pretty responsible person with credit, but I also know that it can be dangerous, right? And if you have access to, yeah, 50, $100,000 worth of capital, and you got these big dreams to grow your business, there's probably quite a few people who are going to go out and spend all that cash to get a bunch of equipment and before they even have the clients, so kind of putting the cart before the horse thing. And, um, you know, the cash works for us. I kind of have a personal philosophy of, when we go on vacations, family vacations, we pay cash or we pay with a debit card. Some people say that's stupid. Why not pay with a credit card so you can get points and all this other stuff? But, it works for us. So, um, you know, cash seems to be what works.
And
Steven,
Jake,
if you don't mind, I got a real quick, just clarifying question about the Stripe Capital because we also have Stripe and we get those offers like through email and stuff. And when we were using PayPal, we also got offers through them. The 19%, that's not necessarily 19% interest, correct? That's just like a percentage per transaction that they're taking to be paid back, correct?
Yeah, so the way it works is they've got a fixed fee, right? So as an example, say for instance, you're borrowing $5,000, okay?
Mhm.
They're gonna have their fixed fee, which is gonna be, for the sake of this conversation, $1,500. So you're gonna
Right.
it's a flat fee for the amount that you borrow. So
Okay.
now you owe $6,500. You gotta pay this $6,500 back. And every 60 days, there's a minimum amount that needs to be met. In this case, call it $1,000. So $1,000 has to be paid on this loan every 60 days. And the way they're going to get that money from you is they're going to take, when you take those smaller loans, like those $5,000 loans, the interest rates are obviously going to be a little bit lower. We all know where we're at with interest rates right now. They're significantly higher than what they were 2 years ago. But that interest rate might be lower and they'll, call it 15%. And they're going to take that 15% of every single transaction and chip away at your balance over the period of you holding the loan the entire time. But you have to fulfill that 60-day rolling minimum. And if you don't fulfill that 60-day rolling minimum, then they're going to debit your bank account for the additional amount, the difference, right? To make sure they get their $1,000 every 60
Mhm.
days. Once you've satisfied that loan, then or you get to 75% on that loan. That's the way Stripe Capital works. You got to pay it down 75%. Then they're going to send you another loan that's going to be for a higher amount, and they're going to roll that balance from your first loan into the new loan, which is going to be significantly bigger, at least double what your first loan is. And you can choose, right? You can choose the amount that you want. Like, you may qualify for up to $20,000, and the interest rate's going to be 19%. But if you really only want to take 10,000 of what you qualify for, the interest rate's going to be lower, right? It's only going to be like 12% or 14% per transaction, because you're not borrowing the maximum amount.
Don't confuse interest rate with the amount that they take out of your per transaction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is the per transaction fee. Like I said earlier, it is a flat fee. You go borrow 10K from Stripe Capital, they're gonna charge you $2,500 to borrow. So you're gonna pay back 12.5, and then it's going to be 15 or 18 or 19% per transaction. So when you got a $40 loan that you're doing, or a $50 loan that you're doing, every single time you run a transaction through Stripe, they're going to take that 18%, and that's going to go towards that rolling 60-day minimum.
So for the sake of this
that's a great
conversation,
clarification.
because we may have some of our listeners that, they also have Stripe and they're debating whether to take out one of these loans. To find out, since they don't really give you the percent interest rate, and maybe that's kind of strategic on their part, right? They just say, oh, it's just a flat fee, blah, blah, blah. But don't be fooled. It's an interest disguised as just a flat fee. It's just different wording, right? So to find that interest rate that you equivalent that you are paying, say you're getting charged $1,500 to take out this $10,000, we would do 1,500 divided by 10,000, correct?
Yeah, so it'd be 15%, right? So if you're borrowing $10,000 and they're charging you $1,500 to borrow 10K, it's going to be a 15% interest, or a 15% is the flat fee that they're going to be charging you, and they're going to get that back by charging you that percentage per transaction. The sticky part of it is you got to make sure that you've got the business coming in, right? You don't want to borrow that kind of money. You don't want to start a loan like with Stripe. I recommend Stripe. They've been great for us. Part of the reason is I don't have a lot of credit. I don't have a lot of personal credit. As I mentioned to you guys, I pay cash for everything, so I don't really have good credit. I do have good credit. I just don't have much credit at all.
You're aging yourself.
Yeah, and so
cash is king, boomer.
Right?
No, just kidding. You're not a boomer. You're not a boomer.
Yeah, but Stripe, they open the doors for a lot of small businesses, and they do give you access to capital. They just need to know that they're going to get it back, and you want to make sure that you're not taking that loan out in the wintertime, because that's when your business is slower. You got to meet those 60-day minimums, and if you don't meet those 60-day minimums, then you're going to be screwed at 60 days when you owe $800 when you haven't. You owe $800 to make that 60 days whole. You want to be taking these kind of loans, if you are, during go time and during your peak season, or right at the beginning of your peak season. So you have 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get this thing paid off on
and I just
time.
want to make one more clarification too. I think it's something important to point out to the listeners. We're talking about this 15% interest rate on or fee from Stripe, but that's not a straight line comparison to, say, a 15% interest on a credit card, which is going to be compounding monthly. And so that can add up and end up in real numbers being much higher depending on how long it takes you to pay off that loan.
Yeah, and I like it for that reason, that they take it per transaction. So, you see the balance going down daily. If you're doing 15, 20 loans a day, then you're paying back 120, 150 bucks every single day towards what you borrowed. So, there's a little bit more incentive too to get out and hustle, to bring in jobs, because every time you bring in more jobs, that's paying this thing down quicker. And if you intend to borrow more money in the future to help your business grow or help you make payroll or whatever the case may be, you want to get that thing paid down as quickly as you possibly can. And knowing that it's coming out of every transaction, you're able to you can budget for that, right? You know what that's going to be. You're not being hit with a tab at the end of the month every single month for a minimum. You do need to make those minimums, like I said, but you're chipping away at that balance with every single job that you do, and that's been helpful for us.
I just made I drew a parallel. Sorry, at a loss of words here. Between this Stripe loan and pay for performance, because you're taking out a percentage per transaction, just like pay for performance, paying your employees, you're giving them a percentage basically of the transaction. And so just like your Stripe loan, it encourages you to go out and get more work, pay for performance. You want to keep feeding that machine of your employees, get more work, and keep that old machine churning. Sorry, I just had that thought popping in my mind.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. It really is.
Hey, let's get Michael in here. I know he was pretty active on the chat today, talking about debt versus cash. Michael, I know you seem to be pretty vocal about the importance of using cash, but at the same time, I know that you've used debt in your business as well. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and thank you guys for having me on. But yeah, like most of us, I didn't start my business with a bunch of capital. Like I told you guys, I'm not shy to talk about my personal life. But when I started my business, I'd recently gone through a divorce. I'd recently lost a previous business, and I was in the middle of a very expensive custody battle. So, I was probably at the bottom financially. So when I started Quiet Lawn, my only option was debt to start the business. And unfortunately, at that time, even on YouTube, there were very few resources, none as far as electric equipment, but there were very few resources. There might have been Lawn Care Millionaire and a few other channels. But back then there wasn't a lot of resources. So when I started Quiet Lawn, I went out and bought the Mean Green mower. I went out and bought the used box truck, and basically financed all the marketing, everything else that first year, and had to take on a good bit of debt. I'm not opposed to debt. I wish I would have had cash to be able to buy all that stuff, but I wasn't able to. But my feeling on debt is that it's a good thing if you know what you're doing and you know your numbers, and you have the experience to know that you're going to get a return on investment with it. We were fortunate that we've been able to grow a successful business and continue to grow it. But there was some luck involved. It wasn't a calculated decision where I knew exactly what the outcome was going to be. But like I said, I'm not opposed to debt. We will use it to greatly scale our business, throughout the years. But, it's always, like Steven said, you want to be cautious because it makes it much easier to buy things you don't really need. And I've bought many pieces of equipment and things over the years that I would have not otherwise bought if we didn't have access to debt. And a lot of that stuff I'm still paying for, and we don't even use it. So I've got a $17,000 Mean Green mower that sits at the shop like a paperweight. So I'm not opposed to it, but I think if you can, especially in the beginning, if you can bootstrap it and pay cash for stuff as you grow, I think that's the best option.
I think it's a lot of great points there. The bootstrapping things in the beginning, I think, is really important. I agree with you wholeheartedly. When we first got started, it was me and my business partner put in. I think our initial seed funding was around like $25,000 to get the business up and running. And for the most part, that's what we ran on for the first year. everything else was paid out of profit. And you know, it wasn't until the second year that we really started. I mean, other than the I would say the vehicle, you know, our car, we bought that on a loan out of the gate. Interest rates were way better than they are today, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, we got a loan, business loan around like 7.5%, something like that for the vehicle. We put a little bit down and then paid the rest with the loan. Going into the next couple of years, though, we've definitely gotten into some financing as we've continued to expand. But you also talked about kind of, you know, knowing what you're doing when it comes to uh, accessing debt and utilizing debt in your business. And Jake, from our discussions, I mean, I think you really put a lot of thought behind any of your purchases with regards to how you use debt. Can you talk about that? Like, what's your decision making process look like?
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. And Michael, I appreciate you sharing the discussion earlier as well as right now. You know, I didn't know a lot of your background history, and it's been cool to kind of have you reveal some of that stuff and kind of just show us your journey of how you got to where you are. We haven't mentioned this yet, so I feel like we're obligated to say this. We're not financial experts. This is not financial advice. This is our disclaimer, okay? So
there we go. Somebody cut that and put it at the beginning of the episode, please.
Because we're not financial experts, we don't have to say a disclaimer. So
there you go. That's a good
point. You listen to us and you go bankrupt, that's on you.
Yeah,
that's on
right.
you. We're just lawnmowers. But yeah, Sean, I'm super passionate about this topic. I've put a lot of thought into it, done a lot of research and a lot of stuff like that. And I find myself that I tend to disagree with a lot of people out and about in society, my friends, a lot of my family members, and more specifically, Dave Ramsey. Because I'm going to make a pretty bold statement right now, but debt does not matter. Okay. Now I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes walking that back and
you're going to have to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. I'm going to insert about a million caveats. So debt doesn't matter. Cash flow is what matters. Okay. So debt doesn't matter, but what you purchase with your debt matters. Like Steven said earlier, if you're going on vacation and you're putting things on credit cards, you know, and then not paying those credit cards off, and you got compounding interest, and this is the bad kind of compounding interest, not the good kind, that is not the right way to spend debt. But if you turn around, if you take on debt, take out a loan, say a small business loan, and then you turn around and invest it in your business, which is a cash flowing asset that can cover those payments, okay, that's what matters. If that's going to help you grow, help you go to the next step, help you increase, you know, revenue, and I'm sure we've all seen it. When we get a cash infusion in our business, a lot of times the result is a huge increase in revenue. Now, another caveat I'm going to put in there, the type of debt you take on matters, okay? I'm a big believer in what's called smart debt, okay? And the components of smart debt is a low interest rate, okay? The highest interest rate that I ever took on was 7% for a small business loan, but I like anything that's 4% or under, because typically, you know, on average, inflation is going to be between 2.5% and 3.5%. So you're kind of keeping up with inflation and kind of coming out even, in my eyes. Okay. There's a lot to unpack there that we're not going to get into on this podcast. Okay. And then, you know, from there, you know, we could go on and on and on, but like I said, the type of debt you take on matters. Okay. And there's a lot of, in my eyes, there's a lot of different ways that you can take on this smart debt, or a lot of different avenues that it comes in. It can come, in my view, in a 0% interest credit card. Okay. You just have to remember is a lot of time that's good for 12 months or 18 months. And after that amount of time, your interest starts up. And if you've racked up $10,000, then you're paying 18, 24% interest on $10,000. And that's where you get in trouble. So if designed properly, I believe that you can, quote unquote, work the system and make debt work for you so that money in your business doesn't have to be as limiting of a factor early on. Okay, I'm going to pause and take a breath because that was a mouthful. And
yeah, man, that was great.
I'd love to hear
I
what
think
you guys have to say.
one thing I kind of want to key in on was something you said early there. You know, obviously you said debt doesn't matter. It's what you buy with that debt, and I think that's really the key point here. People certainly can get carried away, like Steven said earlier, when you have that access to these large amounts of capital, that people will literally throw money at you as a business, but they're not doing it foolishly. They're doing it because they're going to get a massive return out of it, and so making sure that you are buying the right tools to generate more money in your business than you're spending with debt, so that you can pay those off. That's a really key point. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get further into the podcast here. But I want to jump over to Jarmar. Jarmar, if I'm not mistaken, man, you've got a whole separate podcast specifically talking about personal finance and possibly business finance as well. So let's get you in here, and I want to hear your thoughts on debt versus cash.
Yeah, man, money is my jam. I like it. I like it a lot. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I hate to be that guy, but it depends, right? It just depends on who you are, where you are. I mean, well, I guess we're out of Black History Month, so I can say this. I started my business on good old fashioned like slave labor, right? Just me and the mower and weed eater that I already had, and I took no money for it. I just got out there and worked, right? So, I do apologize to the audience that felt uneasy with that phrase, slave labor, but it is what it is. Um, and so that's where I started, because I wanted to test the concept, right? One of the things that Michael said in the Discord earlier is it's hard to call it smart debt when you don't know what you're doing yet, right? When you don't have the machine so dialed in that you know if I put 5 cents in, I'm going to get 10 cents back, right? That is on point. And so starting off, I started with just me, the more I had, the minivan that we had, and we went around to see if we could test this concept. The next, and that's one form of debt, right? That's my own labor, my own risk, my own time, right? I was borrowing money, I'm borrowing time from me, right? The second form was, okay, now that we've got a few more customers, now where I want to get my funding from is my customers, right? And so y'all heard me talk about, getting paid up front for stuff, that type of thing. And that way the customer is financing the business in that scenario. And then so as we kind of grew and said, okay, we're gonna go for it. I took out for equipment wise, I don't mind debt at all for equipment if it's term debt. So equipment, I had equipment already, and the rest of it I did buy cash. But like my van, the van is financed traditionally, right, through an auto loan, commercial auto loan. I took some of my own money and put it into Peaceful Lawn and Garden. So Peaceful Lawn and Garden is indebted to me, if anything. And then the other way that I finance my business in particular is that I keep my JOB, right? And so that's a financial backing of sports. So with that being said, I am not opposed to debt at all, really, if you know what you're doing. Because let's also define debt. Debt is borrowing money. Say if I have $100,000 in cash and I borrow $100,000 to grow a business, I don't call that a debt because I have the assets to back that debt up. So quote unquote, right? Now, if I don't have any money and I borrow $100,000, now you're talking about some debt. So, for example, when I use credit cards for my spending, I have cash in the bank, right? I have cash to spend to pay that credit card off. So I don't look at that as debt. And so those are kind of the way I look at things. I, me personally, I'm looking at what's the full cost of something, right? The full cost, because there's price, there's value, and there's cost, right? And so I look at the total cost of something. If here's an example that we can all relate to. If I go out and buy a dump trailer, right? The dump trailer has a price, right? But it also has additional cost. So not only did it cost me the price, it may cost me some interest, like if I have to borrow money on it. It also may cost me some risk because now I'm carrying this dump trailer around. But it also may cost me some space, some additional money if I gotta find a place to park it, right? If I have to paint it, or if I have to find a decal for it. I look at the entire cost of something and then determine whether or not it's worth it or not. Right? What will be my return on the complete cost of something? And that's how I look at things, not just that black and white. Oh, if it has interest on it, it's bad. Well, not if the interest don't cost you that much, right? What's the total cost? We go back and forth about like home mortgages. Should you pay off your mortgage? And what's the cost of it? It don't cost me much. No, I'm not paying it off because I'd rather go take that money and go make a whole lot more, right? And so that's how I look at things. What's the complete cost of it all? Not just what's the interest rate, or do we get this from a bank? Is it something we got to pay back? Yada yada yada. Because even if you pay off your house, you're still indebted to the tax man. They don't want that. They don't want that property tax every time. So is that a debt? I don't know. It's a cost. You owe it. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's great, John Mar. And we'll see how much of your audio that we can end up using in the podcast here. Really appreciate your insight, man. I think you have a absolutely wonderful mind when it comes to the financial world. I want to kind of touch on a couple of those points, kind of recap them here, just so make sure that they do get into the pod. One, you were talking about what is the price of something versus what is the cost of something, right? So if a mower costs X number of dollars, you got to think about what else goes into that mower to maintain it over time. So the actual cost of it could be the price plus the interest plus the maintenance expenses as well. And so all of that really, the bottom line is what is the cost of that piece of equipment that you're buying, versus just the price, and that will really determine whether it's a good investment in terms an overall investment. And if the total cost isn't that much different because you're paying cash versus credit because you have a really low interest rate, then why not go ahead and take a loan out and use debt to purchase that. I think one of the other things that you touched on was, really just the equity formula, right? Like assets minus liabilities equals equity. And so if you have the cash on hand to buy something, but at the same time you have a low or zero interest rate, go ahead and use the interest on that because you've got the assets there to back it up. And as long as it's not throwing your balance sheet out of whack there. Now, if you don't have the cash on hand and you're just spending because you've got the credit available, right? That's a very different situation. But if you have the ability to pay that off at any time, it's a much lower risk investment. And same way with you're talking about, you maintain a job, a full-time job, and outside of the lawn care industry. So that kind of gives you some backing, that you're not going to be underwater if things do go sideways. You still have another source of income to be able to pay off and manage that debt. And I think that's really really important point. I haven't really given a whole lot of insight on my thoughts on this yet. I actually I was a finance major in college, came out of school, and I was an accountant for quite a few years. before getting into sales and then eventually transitioning into this green industry. And I think the being able to protect your downside is incredibly important at all times. And so, just because you have access to the capital is something that I think we've all touched on tonight. Just because you have access to the capital doesn't mean you need to spend all of it, right? You have to be very strategic with how you deploy that capital and make sure that there is a return on investment and make sure that you do have a plan to pay it back. I said earlier that we paid cash for pretty much everything in year one and used profits to purchase anything that we needed as we went throughout the season. Going into year two, we wanted to expand. And so expansion growth costs money. And so if you don't have that cash on hand, then you've got to get it somewhere or you're not going to be able to grow. And you have to be able to, have to have that self-control to deploy that capital properly and make sure that you can have a way to recoup it over time. So my personal philosophy is I love debt as long as it's kind of like Jake said, it's smart debt. Using it the right way. If you can get low interest loans and you have a plan to pay it back, that's a very different situation than just, I got this loan for $100,000. I'm going to go buy a $60,000 truck, a $30,000 mower, and get out and see what happens. We've been a pretty heavy user of credit cards to run our business. Honestly, when I got into it, I didn't see that as our strategy at all on the roadmap the first year. Tried to go more traditional route. I went to banks and I was trying to secure some business loans, and we couldn't get them. That was a world that I was not familiar with, not used to. As an individual, my personal credit history is very strong. I've always had a very high credit score. I've used credit for a long time. I would say 95% of the money that I spend in my personal life is on credit. I pay it off at the end of every month, but I build up that credit history and I build up my credit score so that when I do need access to capital, I can get it pretty much anytime at almost no cost. And so when I get into a business that doesn't have that credit history built up, it was kind of a shock to me, going to a bank and asking them for money, and they're like, pound sand. It was eye opening. And so I ended up getting a couple of credit cards the second year. We got some introductory rates, got 0% on those, and we racked up a good amount of debt on those. But we had a plan for it. We knew that the things that we were buying were going to make us more money than they cost, and we would be able to pay those loans down before the interest came due. And we've continued to just kind of going into our third year now. We've done the same thing. We got more zero interest credit cards. We had a little bit that was left over. We had the cash to pay it off, but we were actually able to get another credit card that offered a 0% APR on transfers. So we paid like 1.5% for a transfer fee and put all of that on another zero interest credit card loan. So we've been, we'll be able to take, I think that in total was about a $10,000 or $15,000. We had the cash on hand. We could have paid it off, but basically for 1.5%, we're able to go get bankrolled for 2 years on $15,000 with no other interest charges going on that at all. Now, at the end of that term, we've got to make sure that we have a plan. We're continuing to pay that down. We've got to monitor it. That's where budgeting is really important, being able to plan these things out and have a roadmap to get to the end, to get to zero before, like Jake said, before you start getting hit with those 20% interest rates on $20,000. That's a big whammy. So it's a delicate game. You have to be what's the word I'm looking for?
Disciplined.
Discipline. Thank you. You have to be disciplined if you're going to use debt. If you've got issues with self-control. It's a scary world to get into, rolling credit card to credit card, but it can be very valuable and allow you to grow your business at the same time.
Yeah, I think to Michael's point and to Jamar's point, I appreciate all of that. And obviously you're responsible with your credit, right? You've proven that you're responsible. You also need to take into consideration that you also have an established business, right? So you've got business. You guys are in a good spot where unless something tragic happens, you will continue to, at minimum, make the same amount of revenue that you guys are making right now. And you're using that capital to grow your business. The important thing here that everybody needs to understand is 99% of the rest of the people are not responsible with credit. And they've proven it time and time again with the defaults where they are. I mean, the default rate is like super, super high. And I'm with Michael in that philosophy of don't take out a bunch of debt to start a business, right? It's just not wise to do that. You never know what's going to happen. So you don't want to borrow $25,000 to start a business. Obviously, it's a much lower risk once you already have an established business to borrow that $25,000 because if you don't have the 25,000 cash like Jamar has to cover the nut and you've got the cash to cover the nut, you got to understand, man, most people don't. And I would never encourage anyone to ever go out and borrow $25,000 to start a business unless you got $25,000 in the bank to cover it. Because the reality of it is people don't. Another thing that I want to get in that I would like to mention, and it's a trap, as Michael was talking about earlier on Discord, is this payday loan thing. You guys probably get these emails too from these MCAs, right? These are what they're called. They're called Merchant Cash Advance. And they are mostly these companies that are based out of New York. They're going to send you an email that says, I'll loan you $250,000 and it's going to be daily payments, right? And they're going to be taking daily payments from you of these flat fees daily, and they're going to take it from you every single day. And people are just getting murdered by these merchant cash advances right now. Um,
It's like taking money from the mafia, man. It's it's a dangerous world. It can snowball fast.
It's absolutely criminal what they're doing. And it's like 60% of the people that take a merchant cash advance default because they don't have the capital to pay it back. They take this money thinking, oh, yeah, I'm going to go out and start this business and I'm going to borrow $40,000 or whatever the case may be. And then all of a sudden they're getting dinged every single day from their checking account for $375 or $350 a day. They're like, oh, well, I'm making $500, $600 a day. I can cover that. I can cover that. All it takes is 1 week of rain or 1 week of snow or ice, and you can't make that minimum. And then they're going to start blowing you up. And these merchant cash advance companies are wrecking small businesses. Jump online and read about it, man. It is absolutely just, they're annihilating small businesses and they're coming after people. So, my advice to anyone that's listening to this, including all you merchant cash advance knuckleheads that are probably listening, is stay away from that. Do not ever do it. That is the devil's den. Do not ever, ever, ever. Anybody wants to dangle a merchant cash advance in front of you, an MCA, it's technically not even a loan. They can't even by law, they can't call it a loan. It's not a loan. It's an advance against against future receivables is how it's classified. Nothing in their documentation says that this is a loan because they can't call it a loan because it's not legal to call it a loan. That's how bad it is. So
100%, and I think that's a great transition here. You know, we've got a question in the chat online from Ronnie Rodriguez. I don't know why he's not on the line with us here tonight, but he wants to know how much cash should people have on hand. And I think that's it kind of ties in really well with saying when you get started, you've got to have something. I knew I wanted to start a business for well over a decade, and so for about 10 years, I was putting cash aside into an account, saving up to be able to open this thing up. And so you don't want to just start 100% on debt. You need to have some seed funding in there, whether you're getting it from an investor in the company, or it's something that you've saved up on the side for ready to go. But you've got to have that rainy day fund. If you've like you said, Stephen, if you've got a week of rain, you could be screwed if you're in too tight with these loans and demanding payments on a very strict schedule. So what is the right amount of cash to have in reserve? What do you guys think? Anybody want to jump on this one?
When you first starting off, you need to go get money. Period. Like, don't even think about it. Go get customers. Period. You need to go get customers. Without customers, it don't matter anyway. You're going back to the JOB, especially if you quit your job to start off to do lawn care. You're going back to your job, right? So first rule of manhood or womanhood is to be able to feed, house, and clothe yourself, right? Just like period. Like that's how you transition from boyhood to manhood, right? And then if you become a father, then you got to be able to feed, house, and clothe, your wife or your girlfriend or your children, and yada yada yada. That has to be first and foremost. So whatever you need to do to make that happen. But if you're talking about starting a business, go get customers. Period. Like, if you're thinking about that and you're first starting off, you're thinking too much, or you're thinking about the wrong things. You're thinking about not success but failure, right? So you might as well not even start. You're not ready to start yet, right? So that's kind of what I would say, dude. Just go get customers, and then utilize the money that you get from the customers to go get you some more customers. And you got to find a threshold. Period. You got to get to a point to where the cash flow is enough to where it can actually make a difference, and you can save something. But until then, just put your head down, go get it.
Yeah. Absolutely, man.
Hey, Jake, what do you try to keep on hand as your reserve? I mean, how do you base that? Is it off of how many weeks runtime, how many months runtime? Is it based off of some estimate of total cash flow for the year? How do you base your target reserves?
You're muted.
You there? Hello?
There we go.
All right. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. I was just saying, I wish I had some scientific equation and everything, but total transparency, I do not. The one thing that we do, like that Jamar said, is we have customers pay on the first of the month, so they're prepaying for their services. So this goes back to what I said. When I said debt doesn't matter, cash flow is all that matters. Okay, so they're kind of advancing me the money to operate the business. Okay, so then once the money's in my hands, that's when my responsibilities start, right? So how I allocate that towards any debt that we do have, any overhead that we do have, and then also the savings, like you mentioned. Okay, savings for taxes, and then we only operate 9 months out of the season, so savings for the winter, so that I can have an income during the winter as well. So I really don't have, a percentage or this or that. I will say throughout the season, it does grow because I'm trying to build up that buffer to get me through the winter without having to work for those 3 months. But yeah, definitely no percentage. But as far as how much money I think that it kind of takes to get started, I mean, it's not much, man. I mean, it's kind of part of the reason why I got into this business. Not to mention that I'm just weird and I love manual labor and I love being outside and all that stuff. But it's very low entry, man. When I started in the fall of 2018, and when I started, I was renting a room in a house from my future father-in-law. and they had a gas mower there, and my neighbor had a gas leaf blower. And so I borrowed those two things. I loaded them into my 2006 Chevy Trailblazer, and I hit the road and went and started finding customers. You know what I mean? So then it wasn't until that next year where I had a little bit of a customer base lined up, and I knew that I was going to have some cash flow, so that I was able to take on debt, that I ended up doing that small business loan. And even then, you know what I mean? Like, I maybe could have gotten $20,000-$30,000, but I only took $7,000, because that's what I figured out I'd need to really get like a quote unquote nice setup for, lawn care out of my what did I have now? I had a Chevy Trailblazer. Yeah. So yeah, I won't ramble on much more, but it really doesn't take much, but like everybody else is saying, just get that cash flow going. You have to, what I like to say is, you have to cover your assets. ASS is the key word. Okay. So if you're taking out debt, you're covering that in some way, whether it's cash flow, money that you have in the bank for a rainy day fund, or, a huge customer base, something that is going to get you out of that debt, if need be.
Those are great points, man. We're talking about assets, with like vehicle loans. I think of those a lot differently, because you have that asset to back it. Worst case scenario, you can turn around and sell the car to help pay off that loan. But it's you always have to. The cash flow piece of it is incredibly important. I think that's maybe an overlooked point in this conversation. I've heard lots of horror stories about people in this industry going out doing work and not getting paid for it. Right, the customer, the check's in the mail. Oh yeah, I just dropped it off the mailbox. It'll, and you end up waiting a couple weeks, couple months. It drags on. You got to make sure that you're getting paid when you're doing that work, and that will solve 99% of your problems with cash flow, and whether it's cash or debt. That's, if you have your cash flow in line, you are infinitely more likely to have a successful business.
That's such an underrated point right there, Sean, because I see this over and over. I'm on these Facebook groups, and these guys are not wanting to pay credit card fees, processing fees, and they're just, grabbing the cash from under the mat, or, receiving checks in the mail to avoid these credit card processing fees. But at the same time, they're spending hours and hours a week chasing down these payments. And what we're missing here is that your time is worth money. If you weren't chasing down those payments, how much more work could you go get done? Okay. Or like, how much more gas do you spend going and driving around, because Miss Susie finally, on Saturday morning, put the cash under the mat, and you really need it, so you got to go now. So you spend $5 in gas to go grab the $30. It's like, but all just to save, $1 on a credit card processing fee, So if that's you and you're listening to this, take a long, hard look, think about what your time is worth, and, how much time you're wasting chasing down payments.
Yeah. Or just mark up your prices by 1.5% to cover that fee. I mean,
Amen.
duh. I mean, you should be doing that anyway. You should be raising your prices at least once a year, if not twice a year. I know we have.
Yep.
To speak to that point
Absolutely.
of cash, Sean, we run pretty lean, quite honestly, man. We don't have a lot of cash. We got enough to cover about 1 month of payroll, for catastrophe, and, a little bit extra. But, we also own everything that we have. We own all of our trucks, our trailers, all of our equipment. We don't have leases, or we don't have a note on anything. We own it all. So the reality of it is, if something tragic did happen, we could unload everything we have for cash,
There
bail
you go.
ourselves out of a situation.
And what's really interesting, Stephen, going through COVID, what we found out really quickly is that the average company, large or small, does not have typically more than 4 to 6 weeks cash on hand. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I believe it, man. I mean, 60% of the population of the United States only has doesn't even have like 3 months of savings or something ridiculous. I don't have that number right, but it's not good.
67% live check to check.
There we go. That's what it is. I knew it was bad.
Yeah, we were actually. I was having this conversation with my my business partner earlier today. We're looking at some expenses we've got coming up here in the spring before revenue really starts flowing in, and we were talking about how much cash do we need to keep, and my answer was enough to let me sleep at night. As long as I feel comfortable, we can make it a few weeks. We're very early on in this business. Starting a business is a risky venture, right? You have to have some comfort level with risk to get into business, to start your own business. If you can't live with some level of risk, be an employee somewhere, man. There's nothing wrong with that. This is not for everyone. You've got to be comfortable with a little bit of risk, but at the same time, like you got to be able to sleep so that you can function and go out and continue to sell the next day.
Yeah, and Stephen mentioned it earlier, but we didn't really stop and dwell on it much. But you mentioned, Stephen, that it's really up to the individual, man. Everybody has a different amount of risk tolerance, and that's okay. So, taking on debt or not taking on debt really starts with knowing yourself, knowing your tolerance, knowing how disciplined you are. And then also, too, before you take on any debt, do anything that we talked about here or not do anything we talked about here, do your research, please. And that's the only reason why I feel comfortable taking on debt, is because before I did take on any debt, I had been learning about debt for probably a minimum of 2 years before even taking on any of that debt. And now I feel more comfortable and I feel that it's less risky because I understand it, and I understand the amount of discipline that needs to go into it, and how it can be structured, and how much I need to cover myself, and all the different aspects of lowering that risk and feeling more comfortable and being able to sleep better at night.
Hey, Michael, I think you're a little bit. You've been doing this longer than most of us here on the podcast tonight. I'm curious, like at your stage in the business, do you have a different feeling on what your reserve level should be? I don't know how many employees you're up to now, but just making sure that you've got enough, because obviously you're responsible for quite a few people at the company as well. So how do you think about this?
It's really going to vary throughout the year. During the winter, you're obviously going to want to have a lot more reserves because the revenue's not coming in. But I highly recommend anybody that's not read Profit First to read Profit First and start that strategy, because we implemented that, I think, the second or third year in business, and it made a world of difference as far as my stress level, and how we were able to get through the winters financially. So right now we've got a pretty good reserve. We didn't really have to eat into our winter fund much at all. And we've gotten a lot of prepays, but it's going to vary throughout the year. But implementing a profit first strategy and reading that book, will kind of take the it'll kind of automate that process so that you have cash reserves. As far as Ronnie's question, it really, how much cash you need to get started. It really depends. There's a lot of variables with that, and a lot of factors, but it really depends how fast you want to grow. And this ties into debt and why we use debt, because it's cash is fuel to grow our business. My point, talking to Jake, and you guys, this morning is, there's been a lot of people in history who thought they were slick, or who are much slicker than we are, and had built, multi-million-dollar businesses and then went bankrupt, because they thought they had it all figured out. And they didn't. I'm not opposed to debt. I just, it's I view it as a necessary evil at this point in our business to grow our business and get it to where we are, because it's difficult to have a business that's growing fast, and still producing enough extra profit to be able to reinvest. So, it's typical you're going to have to use debt to get started and grow your business if you want to grow it aggressively. But I just stress that uh, use humility and not be naive to think that that you have it all figured out, and that you're not going to fall into the same trap that people much more savvy than us have fallen into. And, that would include Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey was a multimillionaire in his 20s, with real estate. And he was real slick. And, he was using good debt to buy homes, and it made him a lot of money. But when the savings and loan crisis took place in the 80s, and the banks called all of his notes due immediately, he lost everything and went bankrupt. And to your point, it's the common theme is, if you have a plan and you budget, everything will work out. But bad stuff doesn't happen. When things go to plan, it happens when they don't go to plan. And that's kind of, like I said, that's just kind of my advice, is just to use caution. Now, when we understand our numbers with our business, and we have a lot of experience, I think debt can be a very good thing and a very positive thing. But, like I said, my main message is just to, use caution and make sure you really do know that you're making a good choice, and learning from the mistakes of others. But yeah,
Now
so
that's
back to the point. I'm sorry, back to the point with Ronald starting a business. You could start it literally with nothing, but it's going to grow a lot slower. But if you have 10, 15, $20,000 that you can invest, I would invest 90% of that into marketing. That's the best use of your money, instead of going out and buying a bunch of equipment to mow 100 customers and you have zero. I'd rather go get the 100 customers, and then you're going to have the capital coming in to buy the equipment you need, or you're going to be able to build up to it. But, like I said, it really just depends how fast you want to grow.
get the customers and then figure out how to service them.
I'll just say too, Michael, thank you so much for providing that bit of insight in what I'll just call myself out. I'm lacking in years of experience. You know what I mean? So I'm not a young guy, but I'm 34 years old, and so I haven't really truly been in the workforce during a recession. We're probably coming up on one here, so it'll be really interesting, and I kind of look forward to riding it out and kind of learning a ton from it. But to hear the words that you just said, that even Dave Ramsey and a lot of really people that are smarter than us, had everything going right, thought they were doing everything good, multimillionaires, and the kingdom came crashing down. It's eye-opening. And as you were talking there, right before you just said make sure to be humble, I put hashtag stay humble in our little group chat, because it's just a really good reminder, man. And I really appreciate that.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Stay humble. I hope I didn't come across too cavalier in my descriptions of how we use debt at our company earlier on in the podcast. I started. I took a job at a mutual fund company in the beginning of 2008. For those of you that are old enough to remember, that wasn't a great time for the financial industry. I've seen how things can very quickly unravel from great plans. And so when I talk about making a plan and making sure that you have a roadmap for how to pay for your debt, it's more than, for me at least, it's more than just having a roadmap for my business and how I'm going to pay for that debt. It's also having a safety net in place too, right? Like, I've got a family. I'm married. I've got 2 kids. And so I've got to make sure that whatever I am doing for my own endeavors with this business, that I'm also able to continue to take care of my family. And my wife has a very stable job in the healthcare industry, and so we always have that to fall back on. And at the same time too, I have I feel like I can take, if things were to go completely sideways at any time, I can take the experiences that I have learned, and the knowledge that I've built from running this business, and fairly quickly turn it around to a decent role in either in this industry or in another industry, to be able to support and be able to pay off that debt in maybe a longer term than I had originally planned. But we do have that fall back plan. It's always cover your downside. I think that's a quote from Richard Branson, is, always protect the downside. Take risks. I mean, that's, he's one of the biggest entrepreneurial risk takers out there. But be able to protect the downside is always important.
Hey, Sean, since we're throwing quotes out there, I feel like we'd be remiss if we had this type of discussion without mentioning Mr. Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I've got a quote from him, if you don't mind me reading it. The quote is, poor and middle class people acquire liabilities that they think are assets, while rich people acquire money-making assets. So I think that's just a reminder of that's okay, because Robert Kiyosaki himself, he's a billionaire, but he's also like $1 billion in debt. But the difference is when he buys something, it's a money-making asset, so he's covering his downside. He's making sure that he's utilizing smart debt.
Yeah, if you're buying Mai Tais on a vacation, right, that's not making you any money. But if you're buying a tool that is going to generate cash for your business, that's a very different scenario. And not just any tool, making sure that you're getting the right price on that tool. You're buying the right tool for the job. Making sure that you kind of stage your way up. You don't need to go out and buy a brand new $30,000 electric grandstand to get started in this industry. You can start out with a couple mowers for a few $100 to get going. And
if you've got the $30K to spend it, and you just got it to blow on your business, you spend the $30,000 on marketing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Get
the smallest tool you can to be able to perform the job, and get the rest on marketing, so that it's going to return more money for you in the long term.
Yep.
30K can go a long way with Lawn Pro marketing.
Yeah, I guess it can.
Heck yeah, man.
On that note, thank you for our sponsor, Lawn Pro Marketing, here tonight. Stephen, we all appreciate everything you do for us, man. It's good to have you on board.
I appreciate you guys.
A lot of insights.
Glad to have Michael here tonight.
Heck yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm just disappointed he's not in the hot tub.
I am. How can you tell?
I was about to say, he very well could be. We wouldn't know.
Prove it.
But
thank you, conversation.
Yeah, right. But like you guys said, I'm not opposed to that at all. But just you just gotta. Another quote. I don't know if this is something I came up with, or I'm sure somebody else has said it. But a smart man learns from his own mistakes. A wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Always be cautious when doing stuff, and don't, let's not think that we are, wiser than we are at this point. And, I've used debt. I'm not opposed to it. We've had to use debt at different stages of growth in our business. And it was fuel, and it was a positive thing on our business to this point, but it could have gone the other way. I can't say we have enough of a track record that I can, that I knew exactly how it was going to go, and I did make a lot of purchasing decisions that weren't the smartest, and bought things that you know weren't great for my business. Spent money on marketing that we weren't very good at. Nobody's good at marketing in the beginning, and you're not going to be very effective with that. So you end up, if you're borrowing that money, you're not really getting good use of it because you don't know what you're doing yet. So that's just kind of my point. If it's a necessary evil, it can help you if to get your business to a certain point, but just be very smart when you're making those decisions and understand that you're playing with fire, and at any point when something goes wrong, you're going to get burned.
I can't agree with that more, man.
If you don't have a plan, like for what happens when things don't go the right way, then you messing up. Like as a human being, as an adult, as a businessman, like that's what it really comes down to. We talk about risk. Like I can borrow a bunch of money, but when it comes down to, I'm very risk averse. I don't like risk. Hence, I have a job, right? But even with before I even started to even think about having a business, I had a lot of money set aside. So I have a bunch of cash set aside. I have a bunch of contingencies plans in place, right? And if you don't have that stuff, you should have that in just regular life in general, not just because you have a business. It's all about where you are and what you're prepared to do and what you're prepared for. And so if you're gonna take on debt, but you don't even have insurance on your house, or you don't have insurance, or you don't have enough money in the bank to cover a deductible in case you wreck your car or something like that, like business is not what you should be doing anyway. You need to take care of those basic things first, and then always have a plan. Think about how the banks are. If you will scrutinize yourself with debt and money, just like the banks scrutinize you, you'll be fine. Because what the banks want, they want collateral. They want some credibility, right? If you don't have any collateral, or you don't have any credibility with yourself, you should know better. And don't put yourself into that position, in that situation where you go into debt and you end up owing somebody something, right? Like if I borrow, everybody's situation is different, right? So, you may hear of some $1 billion company, they they pulled out $1 billion. You're not $1 billion company, right? You're not there. You're not me. You're not Michael. You're not Steven. You are your own individual. You need to look at that way and make decisions appropriately, accordingly.
That's
That's
great,
a great
Jarmar.
point. I was
I'm
just gonna
gonna.
say,
Sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Sean, real quick, man. I mean, Jamar just makes such a good point that if you don't have a plan for if shit does hit the fan, like get that figured out first, because it's one thing to be risky with like our life and what we got going on in our financial life, but it's a whole nother thing once we start hiring on these employees, and they're depending on us for an income, and they've got families and stuff like that. That's next level responsibility and accountability that you have to hold yourself to. But I'll just leave it at that.
That's a very good point. I'm gonna. All right, we're a little over the hour mark here tonight, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I want to throw in one more point of emphasis and a little bit of a confession to take this out tonight. Michael mentioned, be a wise man, right? Learn from other people's mistakes. And so that kind of leads me into my confession here. I had actually heard Michael on another podcast talking about a $17,000 paperweight at early on last season. And I thought, he doesn't know my market. I'm gonna buy that $17,000 paperweight, and I'm gonna put it to work, and I'm gonna make it make money. And now I've got myself a $17,000 paperweight as well. So learn from the people who have been in this industry before you. Don't think you're smarter than people who have created successful businesses in your industry around you. Learn from their mistakes and make your company better for it. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate all the insight from all of you. I've learned a ton. It's been very informative. I'm going to take a lot of this back to my business, and I hope all of our listeners do the same. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it, and have a great night. Cheers.
Always be charging. Peace.
Good night.